Please, I'm just short by $4. She hasn't eaten since this morning. The young woman at the drugstore counter had a 1-year-old girl balanced on her hip and a can of baby formula in her other hand, and the particular stillness of someone who has already swallowed their pride once tonight and is deciding whether they can swallow it again. The cashier, a teenager who looked uncomfortable with the situation, glanced toward the back of the small store where the manager's office light was on. Rowan Beckett had been walking past when he heard it. He was 33 years old, still in his restaurant clothes, the plain black shirt and worn non-slip shoes of someone who spent their evenings elbow-deep in hot water, and he had exactly $22 in his jacket pocket, tips from a Thursday dinner shift at Caldwell's Bistro, where he washed dishes for $11 an hour and kept his eyes down and his work honest. He walked to the counter without deliberating, placed a 5 on the counter beside the formula. "That should cover it," he said quietly, and didn't look at her long enough to make it complicated. The woman, her name was Petra Hollis, 30 years old, looked at him with eyes that were tired and grateful and carrying something heavier than one missed meal. "I'll pay you back," she said. Things have been—" "You don't have to explain," Rowan said. "She's hungry. That's enough." He left before she could say anything else, walking back through the cool night toward the bus stop, $17 still in his pocket, the transaction already fading into the ordinary texture of his day. Rowan Beckett had learned early that money was a tool and not a measure. He had grown up in a household where there was never quite enough, and that experience had produced in him not resentment, but a finely tuned awareness of what need looked like in other people, the particular angle of a person's shoulders when they're embarrassed about money, the way they hold objects they're not sure they can keep. He recognized it the way you recognize a language you grew up hearing. He did not think about Petra Hollis after that night. He had no reason to. But Petra thought about him. She put her daughter Willa to sleep that night and sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment and held the can of formula and cried quietly, not from sadness but from the accumulated weight of the last 8 months. Her husband had left 4 months after Willa was born, cleanly and without sufficient explanation. Her maternity leave had run out, and her job in events coordination had evaporated with it when the company restructured. She had been piecing together freelance work and asking her father for as little as possible, because asking her father for anything was its own particular cost.
Her father was Clifton Hollis, 61 years old, CEO of Hollis Group, a mid-sized food service and hospitality company that employed over 300 people across 11 properties, including Caldwell's Bistro, which he had acquired 18 months ago as part of a portfolio expansion. He was not a cruel man, but he was a man who had built everything through discipline and pressure, and had never fully learned the difference between running a company and running a family. Petra had grown up with every material comfort and a persistent, quiet loneliness that she'd stopped explaining to people because she didn't have the vocabulary for it. Clifton was coming into Caldwell's the following morning for what his operations director had called a routine review. It was not routine. The bistro was underperforming against quarterly targets, and Clifton had already drafted a restructuring plan that included eliminating 6 positions. The dishwashing team was flagged. He arrived at 9. The restaurant was in its quiet pre-service preparation, staff moving through their opening routines. Clifton walked the floor with his operations director, Marcus, reviewing numbers on a tablet, asking clipped questions, his mind already organizing the conversation he planned to have. He stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw Petra. She was standing at the pass-through, talking to someone on the kitchen side, a man in a plain black shirt who had apparently just handed her something. Clifton watched his daughter's face, the warmth in it, the ease, the way she laughed at something the man said. He hadn't seen her laugh like that in months. He waited until she noticed him. She went still for a moment, then composed herself and came over. The brief hug they exchanged had years of complicated history in it. "I didn't know you were coming today," she said. "Routine review," he said, then carefully, "Who were you talking to?" She glanced back toward the kitchen. "Rowan, he works here. He did something kind for me last week. I wanted to thank him properly." Clifton looked at the man through the pass-through, setting up his station with the efficient, unhurried movements of someone who takes quiet work seriously. "What did he do?" Petra told him, $4, baby formula, gone before she could even thank him. Clifton was quiet for a long moment, Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, but the way a room shifts when someone opens a window and the quality of the air changes. He walked into the kitchen. Rowan looked up. "I'm Clifton Hollis. I own this restaurant." Rowan's expression was neutral and respectful. "Sir, my daughter tells me you helped me last week." A pause, "with formula for my granddaughter." Rowan shook his head slightly. "It was $4. Anyone would have done it." "No," Clifton said, and his voice had something in it that hadn't been there when he'd walked through the door. "They wouldn't. I've watched people walk past worse." That afternoon, Clifton sat alone in the manager's office for 45 minutes before calling Marcus in. The restructuring plan sat on the table between them. Clifton looked at it for a long time. "Find another way," he said finally. "Hours adjustments, scheduling optimization. I want every position preserved if it's operationally possible." He paused, "and get me Rowan Beckett's full employment file." Marcus didn't ask why. He had worked with Clifton long enough to recognize when something had recalibrated in him.
Rowan was offered a shift supervisor position 2 weeks later, a role that had been quietly restructured from the eliminated positions, carrying better hours and a meaningful pay increase. The offer came through HR without fanfare or explanation. He accepted it carefully, without fully understanding why it had come. He understood on his first shift as supervisor, when Petra appeared at the bistro for a late lunch with Willa on her hip, and they sat at the counter, and he brought them 2 waters and a small bowl of crackers for Willa, without being asked. And Petra looked at him with the clear, uncomplicated warmth of someone who has decided a person is worth knowing. "My father offered you that position," she said. Not as accusation, just as honesty. Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I figured." "He doesn't do things like that," she said. "He's done a lot of things I wish he'd done differently. But he saw you give 17% of everything you had that night for a stranger and her baby, and something changed in him." She paused. "I think he remembered what he used to be like, before everything became numbers." Rowan looked at her steadily. $4, he said again. $4, she agreed. And everything that came with them. Clifton Hollis visited the bistro every Thursday after that. He sat at the counter, ordered the same thing, and talked to the staff by name. Small changes. Slower. More like a man who had remembered something important than one who had learned something new. Kindness given in the ordinary dark, with no witness, no calculation, no expectation of return, has a way of finding the one person who needed to see it most. You never know who is watching. You never know whose father is about to reconsider everything. Give anyway. The world turns on moments exactly that small. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.